Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. I've been delivering food for a popular app for about 6 months. The pay wasn't much, but it got me through. Late night shifts were my bread and butter. People tip better after midnight, especially if the weather was bad or the delivery was far. I didn't mind the quiet roads or the dark corners of town, at least not until that night. It was a Tuesday, slow as usual. I was parked near a gas station, scrolling through my phone when the notification popped up. A delivery request. 11:30 at night. The payout was high enough to catch my attention, though the address was in a part of town I wasn't familiar with. The instructions were odd. Leave the food at the back door. Do not knock or ring the doorbell. Strange, sure, but not unheard of. People get weird about their privacy. Maybe they had a sleeping baby or a dog that went nuts at the sound of a bell. I accepted the order, punched the address into my GPS, and hit the road. The drive started normal enough, but as I got closer to the location, the streets grew narrower, the houses more spread out. Street lights disappeared, replaced by the oppressive darkness of overgrown trees leaning in from both sides of the road. The GPS took me off the paved road onto a dirt one. Gravel crunched under my tires as I drove deeper into the woods. The signal on my phone flickered, and the map stuttered, recalculating itself twice before settling on the route again. Finally, the headlights caught the silhouette of a house. It sat at the end of the road like something out of a forgotten era. The porch sagged under years of neglect. The windows boarded up with planks that looked as old as the trees around them. The entire structure leaned slightly, as if it might collapse under its own weight. I hesitated, the engine idling. This didn't look like a place anyone would live. But then again, I'd seen my share of strange homes during deliveries. People lived where they could, not always where they wanted. Grabbing the bag of food, I stepped out of the car. The night air was heavy, damp, and carried the faint smell of moss and decay. My footsteps crunched on the gravel as I made my way around the side of the house. The backyard was worse. Overgrown grass reached up to my knees, and the faint outline of a rusted swing set loomed in the darkness. The wind rustled the trees above, their branches clawing at each other like skeletal fingers. I found the back door. It was a single, weathered slab of wood, barely hanging onto its hinges. No light came from inside, no signs of life at all. I set the food down, careful not to disturb the eerie silence. That's when I heard it. "Thank you." The voice was low, raspy, and so close it felt like warm breath on my neck. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was no one there. Just the empty yard and the rustling trees. The bag of food was gone. I stared at the spot where I had just set it down, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. I hadn't even heard footsteps. There was no way someone could have grabbed it and disappeared that quickly. Panic bubbled up in my chest. I backed away, nearly tripping over the uneven ground, and bolted for my car. The house seemed to loom taller as I ran, the boarded windows like empty eyes watching me. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking, and finally got the door open. Slamming it shut behind me, I started the engine and peeled out of there, the tires kicking up gravel as I sped back down the dirt road. It wasn't until I was back on the main road, surrounded by the comforting glow of streetlights, that I started to breathe normally again. I glanced at my phone, pulling up the app to check the order. It wasn't there. No record of the delivery, no receipt, nothing. It was as if the order had never existed. I checked the address in my GPS history, but it was gone too. When I got home, I tried searching the address online. Nothing came up. No house, no dirt road, no record of anything ever being there. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that voice again. Thank you. For weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been somewhere I wasn't supposed to be, like I had stumbled into a place that didn't want to be found. I quit delivering at night after that. No amount of tips is worth going back to the house that didn't exist. Story 2. I've always been a night owl, so late night deliveries never bothered me. They came with better tips, fewer traffic jams, and a kind of eerie quiet I didn't mind. That was until last night, when I stopped being comfortable with silence. It was around 10 p.m., my last delivery of the night. The order was for a suburban neighborhood about 10 minutes from my usual route. The house was an old ranch-style home, the kind with peeling paint and a sagging roof. Nothing unusual for the area. The porch light glowed faintly, casting long shadows over the cracked walkway. As I pulled up, the neighborhood looked dead. No kids playing, no TVs flickering through windows, just that odd, oppressive stillness. I parked my car at the curb, grabbed the bag of food, and started walking toward the front door. Halfway up the driveway, I noticed him, a man standing near the side of the house, just beyond the reach of the porch light. He wasn't moving, just standing there with his arms at his sides. He was tall, pale, and unnervingly still. "Hey there," I called out, giving a polite nod. "Food delivery." No response. Not even a flicker of recognition. He just stood there, staring at me. His face was blank, almost like he wasn't really seeing me. I felt a shiver run up my spine, but brushed it off. Maybe he was the customer waiting outside and just having a bad day. I turned my back on him and went to the door. The porch creaked under my weight as I rang the bell. I waited. No answer. I knocked this time, louder, but the house was silent. I glanced back toward the driveway. The man was gone. My breath caught in my throat. I scanned the yard, the sidewalk, even the bushes near the house. Nothing. He had vanished as silently as he'd appeared. That prickly feeling you get when someone's watching you, it was crawling all over my skin. My mind raced through every rational explanation I could think of. Maybe he'd gone inside. Maybe he didn't live here at all. I decided to leave the food on the porch. "Your order's here," I called out, my voice a little higher than I intended. I set the bag down carefully, like I was afraid the slightest noise would shatter the fragile calm. As I walked back down the driveway, I felt it again, that same suffocating sense of being watched. I resisted the urge to turn around, focusing instead on the safety of my car. But halfway there, I couldn't help myself. I looked back. He was inside the house. The man stood in the living room, perfectly framed by the front window. His pale face was turned toward me, his blank eyes boring into mine. He hadn't walked past me. He hadn't opened the door. He was just there. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. The room behind him was dark, the faint porch light barely reaching his figure. But there was no mistaking it. It was the same man, same lifeless stare, same unnerving stillness. A sharp wave of cold washed over me, like stepping into a freezer. My brain screamed at me to move, to get out of there, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. Then he moved. It wasn't a normal kind of movement, not the way people walk or turn. It was jerky, like a puppet on strings, his head tilting at an unnatural angle. He took one slow, deliberate step toward the window, his face never breaking that empty stare. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I ran. I dove into my car, fumbling with the keys as panic clawed at my chest. My hands were shaking so bad it took me 3 tries to get the engine started. When it finally roared to life, I didn't even bother checking for oncoming traffic. I just hit the gas and sped down the street. It wasn't until I was halfway home that I realized I was still gripping the steering, while so tightly my knuckles had turned white. My chest heaved as I tried to steady my breathing. When I finally got home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I locked every door and window, double-checking each one like a madman. But sleep didn't come easy that night. The next day, curiosity got the better of me. I needed answers. I searched for the address online, hoping to find some shred of normalcy to cling to. But what I found only made the knot in my stomach tighten. The house had been vacant for over a year. I stared at the screen, the words swimming in front of me. The last owners had moved out after a string of break-ins. No one had lived there since. I told myself I wouldn't deliver to that area again, but it's more than that. Now, every time I step out at night, I feel that same crawling sensation on the back of my neck. And sometimes, when I glance at darkened windows or shadowy corners, I swear I can see him, just standing there, watching, waiting. Story 3. Rain lashed against the windshield as I gripped the wheel, squinting into the darkness beyond the watery blur of my headlights. Nights like this, I hated my job. Food delivery wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. And on a night like this, rural roads, 0 streetlights, and rain coming down in sheets, I wished I'd called in sick. I was on my last delivery for the night, a single bag of Chinese takeout destined for a house that didn't even appear on Google Maps. The app had me following a jagged line through what felt like the middle of nowhere. No other cars on the road, no houses in sight, just me and the storm. Then I saw her, a woman, walking along the shoulder of the road, her head down, shoulders hunched against the rain. She wore a long coat, so soaked it clung to her frame like a second skin. Her hair was plastered against her face, obscuring her features. Instinct kicked in, and I slowed the car. "Hey," I shouted, rolling down the window slightly. The rain rushed in, cold and sharp against my face. "Do you need a ride?" She didn't respond. She didn't even turn her head. She just kept walking. I blinked, wiped at my eyes, and looked again. She was gone. I pressed on the brakes, scanning the road and the ditches on either side. Nothing. No one. My heart thudded in my chest, louder than the rain hammering the car. Maybe she'd stepped into the woods. Maybe I hadn't seen her at all. Shaking my head, I muttered, "Keep it together, man," and pushed the car forward. The delivery itself was uneventful. The house was plain, sitting at the end of a long gravel driveway. A single porch light glowed like a beacon in the storm. The customer was polite, paid in cash, and thanked me for braving the weather. For a brief moment, I felt normal again. It wasn't until I got back in the car that things started to feel wrong. The interior smelled damp, like wet leaves and stagnant water. At first, I thought it was just my clothes soaked from the rain, but then I noticed the air. It was heavy, oppressive, like something unseen was pressing against my chest. As I pulled back onto the road, a prickle of unease crept over me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It felt like I wasn't alone. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing. Still, the feeling wouldn't go away. I couldn't shake the sensation that someone or something was sitting in the back seat, just out of view. My hands tightened on the wheel, and I fought the urge to turn around. Then I heard it, a faint sound, almost lost beneath the hum of the engine and the patter of rain. Breathing, wet, labored breathing, like someone struggling to suck air through waterlogged lungs. I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded slightly on the wet road, but I didn't care. My heart was pounding, adrenaline surging through my veins. I turned in my seat, ready to face whatever was there. But the back seat was empty, except it wasn't. On the floor, directly behind the driver's seat, was a puddle of water. It glistened faintly in the dim light from the dashboard. I stared at it, my mind racing. How? The windows were rolled up, the doors locked. No one had been in the car. I shook my head, forcing myself to breathe. "It's just the rain," I whispered, though I didn't believe it. "It's just the rain." The rest of the drive home was a blur. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, my paranoia growing with each passing mile. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I was ready to abandon the car and never look back. I didn't even bother unloading my stuff. I grabbed my keys, sprinted to the front door, and locked myself inside. That night, I barely slept. Every creak, every gust of wind sent my heart racing. I told myself I'd check the car in the morning. When dawn finally came, I stepped outside, squinting against the pale light of a gray morning. The rain had stopped, leaving everything damp and glistening. My car sat in the driveway, innocuous and still, but as I opened the door, my stomach dropped. The puddle was gone. In its place was a single footprint pressed into the fabric of the back seat. Muddy, wet, and unmistakably human. I backed away, my heart pounding, and slammed the door shut. I don't know what I saw that night, or who, but I haven't delivered food since, and I haven't driven at night, because sometimes when the rain starts to fall, I swear I can hear it again. That wet, ragged breathing, and I know deep down that she's still out there,